I discovered the betrayal on a Wednesday afternoon in March, sitting in my office reviewing quarterly financial reports when my assistant knocked hesitantly. "Miss Hayes, there's something you need to see," Caroline said, her voice tight with discomfort. She handed me a folder containing printouts of emails, text messages, and bank transfer records that had been anonymously delivered to our reception desk that morning. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. My best friend of 12 years, Sophia Blake, had been systematically stealing my business ideas and selling them to my competitors. The documentation showed a pattern going back 18 months. Confidential business plans I'd shared with her in confidence, product development strategies, client lists, financial projections, all of it had been passed to competing firms in exchange for substantial payments. The betrayal was so thorough, so calculated, that I felt physically sick reading through the evidence. Sophia wasn't just my best friend. She was the person I'd trusted most in the world. The friend who'd been by my side through my divorce, through building my consulting business from nothing, through every major decision and crisis of the past decade. We'd met in graduate school, bonded over shared ambitions and complementary skills, and maintained that friendship even as our careers diverged. I'd confided everything in her, never imagining she'd use that trust against me. The evidence was meticulous. Bank statements showing deposits to Sophia's account totaling over $300,000 from shell companies that traced back to my 3 largest competitors. Email chains where Sophia detailed my upcoming business moves, client strategies, and proprietary methodologies I'd spent years developing. Text messages where she negotiated prices for different types of information. $50,000 for a comprehensive business plan, $20,000 for client lists, $10,000 for smaller operational details. There were even recordings of phone calls where Sophia discussed my business with representatives from competing firms, laughing about how trusting I was, how easy it was to extract information because I never suspected her motives. "She asks for my opinion on everything," Sophia said in one recording, her voice casual and cold. "I just take notes and pass it along. Easiest money I've ever made." The folder also contained evidence that Sophia had been responsible for several business setbacks I'd experienced over the past year. A major client who'd unexpectedly canceled our contract had been approached by a competitor armed with detailed knowledge of our proposal. Information only Sophia had known. A product launch that had failed mysteriously had been sabotaged by a competing firm that released a nearly identical product 2 weeks before ours, clearly based on plans I'd shared with Sophia during development. 3 partnership opportunities that had fallen through had all been undermined by competitors who somehow knew exactly what to offer clients to win them over. Using intelligence about my strategies that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of my business operations. That someone was Sophia. My assistant stood quietly while I processed the information, her expression mixing sympathy with barely concealed anger. "Who sent this?" I asked finally. "I don't know," Caroline replied. "It was delivered in a plain envelope with no return address. But whoever sent it wanted you to know the truth." I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the evidence multiple times, looking for any possibility that it might be fabricated or misinterpreted. But the documentation was too comprehensive, too specific, too verified through multiple independent sources. There was no reasonable explanation except the obvious one: Sophia had been betraying me for money for 18 months. The question was what to do about it. My first instinct was confrontation. Call Sophia immediately, demand explanations, express my hurt and rage. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was the calculated nature of her betrayal, the systematic way she'd exploited our friendship for financial gain. Perhaps it was the recordings where she'd mocked my trust, treating my confidence as a source of amusement rather than something valuable. Whatever the reason, I decided that immediate confrontation would be satisfying, but ultimately less effective than strategic response. I called my attorney, Marcus Brenner, and scheduled an emergency meeting for the following morning. I also called my business consultant, Patricia Wells, who specialized in competitive intelligence and corporate security. Both arrived at my office early Thursday, and I presented the evidence I'd received. "This is corporate espionage," Marcus said immediately after reviewing the documentation. What your friend has been doing is illegal. You could pursue criminal charges, civil lawsuits for damages, and probably get injunctions against the companies that paid her for confidential information. What would be the outcome? I asked. Marcus considered. Criminal charges would be difficult to prosecute, but possible given the documentation. Civil suits would be more straightforward. You could sue for damages, which based on lost contracts and competitive advantage would probably be in the millions. The companies that purchased the information would likely settle quickly to avoid publicity. And Sophia would face both criminal liability and civil damages. She'd probably lose everything: her reputation, her career, potentially her freedom, if prosecutors pursued jail time for theft of trade secrets. Patricia had been reviewing the evidence from a different angle. The question is whether you want justice or strategy. Pursuing this legally would be justified and appropriate, but it would also be public, expensive, and time-consuming. There might be other approaches that accomplish your goals more efficiently. What kind of approaches? I asked. Patricia pulled out a notepad. The companies that purchased your confidential information are now vulnerable. They've used stolen intelligence to compete against you, which is corporate espionage. If that becomes public, their reputations would be destroyed. Clients will flee, and they'd face legal consequences far exceeding whatever advantage they gained from Sophia's information. She continued, your friend Sophia is also vulnerable. She's committed serious crimes, yes, but more importantly from a practical standpoint, she's now a known risk to anyone in the business community. Once people understand she sold out her best friend for money, no one will trust her. Her career in consulting would be effectively over. So, you're suggesting I use the evidence as leverage, rather than pursuing immediate legal action? I asked. I'm suggesting you consider what outcome you actually want, Patricia replied. If you want Sophia punished and your competitors damaged, legal action will accomplish that. But if you want your business protected, your competitive position restored, and consequences for everyone involved without the cost and publicity of litigation, there are other strategies. I spent the next several hours with Marcus and Patricia, mapping out potential approaches. We developed a plan that was strategic rather than reactive, that would accomplish accountability while minimizing my own exposure and expense. The plan required patience, careful timing, and letting truth work its own consequences, rather than trying to force immediate justice. Over the next week, I implemented the first phase of my strategy. I continued my normal routine, meeting with Sophia as scheduled, discussing business challenges and opportunities exactly as I had before discovered her betrayal. But now, everything I shared was carefully calibrated. I discussed business plans that were plausible but ultimately unimportant. I shared client strategies that were generic rather than proprietary. I mentioned development projects that sounded significant but were actually minor initiatives I could easily abandon. Sophia continued her pattern, taking notes during our conversations, asking probing questions, appearing concerned and supportive while clearly gathering intelligence to sell. Watching her perform friendship while systematically betraying me was nauseating, but I maintained my composure, playing the role of trusting friend while documenting every interaction. I also hired a digital forensics firm to monitor Sophia's communications and verify she was continuing to pass information to competitors. They confirmed she'd sent detailed summaries of our conversations to her contacts at rival firms within hours of each meeting, maintaining the pattern that had been established over the previous 18 months. She's absolutely continuing the betrayal, the forensics specialist reported. No indication she suspects you know, or that she's planning to stop. She's treating this as ongoing income, rather than a one-time scheme. Meanwhile, I worked with Patricia to prepare comprehensive dossiers on each of the 3 companies that had purchased information from Sophia. We documented every piece of stolen intelligence they'd acquired, every competitive advantage they'd gained through corporate espionage, and every business decision they'd made based on confidential information they had no legal right to possess. We also identified the specific individuals at each company who'd been Sophia's contacts, senior executives who'd knowingly purchased stolen information and used it to compete unfairly against my firm. Their emails and communications revealed they'd been fully aware the information was confidential and obtained through betrayal of trust, which made them culpable for corporate espionage and theft of trade secrets. 6 weeks after receiving the initial evidence, I was ready to implement phase 2 of my strategy. I scheduled meetings with the CEOs of all 3 competing firms, using the pretext of discussing potential collaboration opportunities. All 3 agreed to meet, probably curious about what I wanted and confident that their use of stolen intelligence had gone undetected. The first meeting was with Harrison Cole, CEO of Stratford Consulting, the firm that had paid Sophia the most money. We met at his office, a sleek space designed to project success and sophistication. Harrison greeted me warmly, clearly seeing this as an opportunity to gloat privately over his competitive advantages. "Natalie, so good to finally meet properly," Harrison began. "I've admired your work from afar. We're competitors, of course, but I've always respected your innovative approaches to consulting." "That's kind of you to say," I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Though I'm curious about how closely you've been following my work." Harrison's expression flickered slightly but maintained professional warmth. "Oh, just industry observation. We all watch each other, trying to stay competitive." "Right," I agreed. "Like when you released that data analytics product 2 weeks before my planned launch last year. The one that was remarkably similar to my proprietary methodology that I'd spent 3 years developing." Harrison went very still. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," I interrupted, opening my briefcase and pulling out a folder. "I'm stating facts. You purchased detailed information about my product development from someone who had access to confidential business plans. You then rushed a competing product to market to undercut my launch." I slid the folder across his desk. Inside were copies of bank transfers from Stratford Consulting to Sophia's shell company accounts, email chains between Harrison's director of business development and Sophia discussing my product plans, and internal Stratford documents showing how they'd used my stolen intellectual property to develop their competing offering. Harrison's face went from confident to pale as he reviewed the documentation. I don't know where you got this, but I got it from someone who wanted me to know the truth about how my supposed friend and my supposed competitors have been operating," I said calmly. "And before you consider denying it or suggesting the evidence might not be authentic, you should know I have 3 independent verification sources plus testimony from the digital forensics firm that traced all the communications." Harrison closed the folder carefully. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand your exposure," I replied. "You've engaged in corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and unfair competition. If I take this evidence to authorities, Stratford Consulting faces criminal investigation, massive civil liability, and complete destruction of your reputation. Your clients would flee the moment they learned you're competing through stolen intelligence, rather than legitimate innovation." I let that sink in before continuing. "But more importantly for you personally, the board and shareholders would hold you accountable. You authorized payments totaling $190,000 for stolen information. That money came from corporate accounts, which means you exposed the company to criminal liability for your personal competitive advantage." Harrison was sweating now, clearly calculating the consequences. "If you're here to negotiate—" "I'm here to inform," I corrected. "I'm informing you that I have this evidence, that it's been preserved with multiple parties, including my attorneys, and that I'll be making decisions about how to use it based on how you and the other parties involved respond going forward." I stood to leave. "You'll be hearing from my attorney about restitution for the competitive damages your theft caused my business. I suggest you consult with your own legal counsel about your exposure and how you want to address it." I left Harrison sitting at his desk looking like he might vomit, the folder of evidence sitting in front of him like a bomb he couldn't defuse. I had similar meetings with the CEOs of the other 2 firms, presenting evidence of their purchases of stolen information and making clear their exposure to criminal and civil liability. Both reactions were similar to Harrison's. Initial denial followed by recognition of how thoroughly documented their misconduct was. then panic about the consequences. "Why are you telling us this instead of just filing charges?" one CEO asked. "Because I wanted you to understand the situation completely before deciding how to respond," I replied. "You have exposure. The question is whether you address it proactively through restitution and changing your business practices, or whether you force me to pursue formal legal action that will be public and devastating." Within a week, all three firms had contacted Marcus about settlement discussions. They wanted to avoid criminal charges and public exposure, and they were willing to pay substantially to make this go away quietly. But I wasn't ready to settle yet. There was still the matter of Sophia, and I wanted her to experience the full consequences of her choices before I decided how to address the competing firms' liability. 2 months after discovering the initial evidence, I invited Sophia to lunch at our favorite restaurant. We met regularly for lunch to catch up on life and business, and this meeting appeared no different from our usual pattern. "Thanks for making time," I said as we settled into our booth. "I know you've been busy lately." "Always," Sophia replied with the warm smile I'd once believed was genuine friendship. "But I always have time for you. What's going on?" We talked about various topics: her recent vacation, my children's school activities, mutual friends. Then I steered the conversation toward business. "I've been thinking about a new service offering," I began, watching Sophia's expression shift to interested attentiveness. "A comprehensive strategic planning package that would combine our existing consulting services with long-term implementation support." I described a completely fabricated business plan, making it sound innovative and potentially lucrative. Sophia asked questions, took mental notes, and displayed all the behaviors I'd come to recognize as her gathering intelligence to sell. "That sounds really promising," Sophia said. "Have you started developing the specifics?" "I'm in early planning stages," I replied. "I'd value your thoughts as I flesh out the details." We continued discussing the fake business plan, with Sophia clearly mining for information she could monetize. Watching her perform concern and friendship while planning to betray me yet again was clarifying. Whatever emotional attachment I'd had to our friendship was completely gone, replaced by cold recognition of who she actually was. "I'm glad we could catch up," Sophia said as lunch ended, "and I'm excited about your new service offering. Keep me posted on how it develops." "I will," I promised. "In fact, I'm planning to share some detailed plans with you soon. I really value your perspective on these things." Sophia's eyes lit up slightly, the prospect of more valuable information to sell. "Anytime, you know I'm always here to support you." 2 days later, my digital forensics team confirmed that Sophia had sent detailed summaries of our lunch conversation to all three competing firms, positioning the fake business plan as legitimate intelligence worth purchasing. The firms had paid her $25,000 for the information, continuing the pattern of corporate espionage even after I'd warned their CEOs about their exposure. That was the evidence I needed to demonstrate that none of the parties involved had reformed their behavior or taken my warnings seriously. They'd all continued their misconduct, believing they could keep operating with impunity. It was time to let truth handle the situation. I called a meeting with Marcus and Patricia to implement the final phase of the strategy. "I'm ready to move forward," I told them, "but I want to do this in a way that maximizes accountability while minimizing my own ongoing involvement." Marcus nodded. "We can file criminal complaints with the district attorney's office and civil suits simultaneously. The criminal charges would be handled by prosecutors, requiring minimal involvement from you beyond initial testimony. The civil suits would be handled by our firm." "What about Sophia specifically?" I asked. "She's facing the most serious exposure," Marcus replied. "She's the one who actually stole the information and sold it. The companies that purchased it are liable for receiving stolen property and corporate espionage, but Sophia is the principal offender. She's looking at potential prison time plus civil liability for damages to your business." Patricia spoke up. "There's another element to consider. Sophia's career is in this industry. Once this becomes public, and it will once charges are filed, her reputation will be destroyed. No one in consulting or business strategy will hire someone known for selling out their best friend for money. The professional consequences might exceed the legal ones." So, filing charges essentially ends her career, regardless of whether she's convicted? I asked. Almost certainly, Patricia confirmed. The accusations alone, backed by the evidence you have, would make her unemployable in this field, and the industry is small enough that the story would spread quickly. I thought about Sophia, about our 12 years of friendship, about all the time she'd supported me through difficult periods that I'd believed were genuine. Then I thought about her voice on those recordings, laughing about how easy it was to exploit my trust, treating my confidence as nothing more than product to sell. File everything, I said. Criminal charges against all parties involved, civil suits for damages, and full documentation provided to relevant professional organizations and industry publications. Let the truth be public. Marcus and Patricia exchanged glances, then nodded. We'll have everything filed by end of week, Marcus said. The news broke 6 days later when criminal charges were filed against Sophia and executives at all 3 competing firms. The district attorney's office held a press conference announcing a major corporate espionage case involving theft of trade secrets and systematic corruption of competitive business practices. My name was mentioned as the victim whose business had been targeted through betrayal by a trusted friend. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Business publications, local news, social media. The narrative was clear and damning. A successful business consultant had been systematically betrayed by her best friend, who sold confidential information to competitors for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The evidence was public record now, available to any journalist who requested the court filings. The recordings of Sophia laughing about exploiting my trust became viral clips, shared widely as an example of shocking betrayal. The text messages where she negotiated prices for different types of information painted her as mercenary and calculating. The bank transfers showing $300,000 in payments demonstrated the scale of her treachery. The public reaction was intense. Sophia was vilified on social media, her name becoming synonymous with betrayal and untrustworthiness. The 3 competing firms faced immediate consequences. Clients canceling contracts, partners distancing themselves, industry organizations launching ethics investigations. The executives who'd knowingly purchased stolen information were placed on administrative leave while their companies assessed legal liability and reputational damage. Sophia called me 2 days after the charges became public. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity about what she'd say won out. How could you do this to me? Sophia demanded, her voice high with panic and anger. We've been friends for 12 years, and you destroyed my life over a business disagreement? A business disagreement? I repeated, my voice cold. Sophia, you stole confidential information and sold it to my competitors for $300,000. You systematically betrayed my trust for 18 months, undermining my business while pretending to be my friend. That's not a disagreement. That's criminal conduct. You're going to send me to prison over this? Sophia's voice broke. My career is over, my reputation is destroyed, and now I might go to jail. For what? For trying to make some extra money. The entitlement was breathtaking. You committed crimes, Sophia. You stole trade secrets and sold them. You engaged in corporate espionage. Those actions have consequences beyond our friendship. I thought you'd understand, Sophia said, now crying. I thought you'd be angry, but that we could work it out privately. I never thought you'd actually file charges, that you'd ruin my entire life over this. You ruined your own life through your choices, I replied. I just made sure those choices had appropriate consequences, rather than allowing you to keep profiting from betrayal. Sophia tried several more approaches, pleading, blaming me for being vindictive, claiming the evidence was exaggerated, suggesting I was overreacting to what she characterized as a minor business ethical lapse. Finally, she said what she'd probably been thinking all along. You're only doing this because you're jealous that I was making money. You can't stand that I found a way to profit while you were just giving away information for free out of naive trust. I'm doing this because you committed crimes and need to be held accountable. I corrected. But Sophia, the fact that you think this is about jealousy rather than about basic ethics and loyalty tells me everything about why our friendship was never what I thought it was. I hung up and blocked her number. We never spoke again. The legal proceedings moved forward over the following months. The district attorney's office pursued criminal charges against Sophia and the executives at the competing firms. All defendants pled guilty to various charges related to theft of trade secrets and corporate espionage in exchange for reduced sentences. Sophia received 2 years in prison, plus 5 years probation, ordered to pay full restitution to my company for damages, and permanently barred from working in consulting or any role involving confidential business information. The executives at the competing firms received lighter sentences, probation and fines, but all lost their positions and faced severe damage to their professional reputations. The civil suits resulted in substantial settlements. All 3 competing firms paid significant damages, totaling $4.2 million. Plus committed to implementing comprehensive ethics training and oversight programs to prevent similar misconduct in the future. The financial settlements covered my legal costs, plus compensated for the competitive damages I'd suffered over the 18 months of Sophia's betrayal. But money wasn't really the point. The point was accountability, ensuring that everyone involved faced real consequences rather than continuing to profit from corruption. The industry response was perhaps more satisfying than the legal outcomes. All 3 competing firms saw their reputations severely damaged, losing clients and struggling to rebuild trust. Several professional organizations launched ethics investigations that resulted in sanctions and increased scrutiny. The case became a cautionary tale in business schools and professional ethics courses, an example of how corporate espionage destroys companies and careers. Sophia's name became synonymous with betrayal in consulting circles, referenced in discussions about trustworthiness and professional ethics. The damage to her reputation was permanent and total, exactly as Patricia had predicted. 6 months after the criminal charges were filed, I was invited to speak at a business ethics conference about my experience. Standing before hundreds of business professionals, I told the story of discovery, strategy, and letting truth handle accountability rather than seeking personal revenge. When I discovered my best friend had been betraying me for money, my first instinct was immediate confrontation. I told the audience I wanted to call her, to express my hurt and rage, to make her feel the pain she'd caused me. I paused before continuing, but I realized that emotional satisfaction would be temporary, while strategic response would be lasting. So instead of confronting her immediately, I documented her continuing misconduct, gathered comprehensive evidence, and built a case that would create real accountability. The betrayal was painful, I admitted. Losing a friendship I'd valued for 12 years, recognizing that someone I'd trusted completely had been exploiting that trust for financial gain, that hurt deeply and still does in some ways. But letting truth handle the situation meant everyone involved faced appropriate consequences. The legal system addressed the criminal conduct. The civil courts compensated the damages. The professional community ostracized those who'd violated ethical standards. I didn't have to be vindictive or seek revenge. I just had to ensure the truth was known and let natural consequences follow. The response was overwhelming. After the presentation, dozens of people approached to share their own stories of betrayal, to ask about how to handle similar situations, to express appreciation for demonstrating that accountability was possible without personal destruction. "Thank you for showing that you can pursue justice without becoming consumed by revenge," one woman told me. "My business partner stole from me last year, and I've been torn between confronting him and just walking away. Your approach of documenting, building a case, and letting truth create consequences, that gives me a framework for addressing it appropriately." I gave her my attorney's contact information and encouraged her to pursue accountability through proper channels, rather than either vengeful confrontation or passive acceptance. A year after filing the criminal charges, my business was thriving. The publicity around the case had actually enhanced my reputation rather than damaging it. Clients appreciated that I'd taken theft of confidential information seriously, that I'd built systems to detect and prevent corporate espionage, and that I'd pursued accountability through proper legal channels rather than revenge. My consulting firm grew substantially, hiring additional staff and expanding service offerings. We implemented enhanced security protocols, educating clients about protecting confidential information, and building trust through transparency rather than blind faith. I also started offering consulting services specifically around business ethics and corporate governance, helping companies develop systems to prevent the kind of misconduct that had damaged my business. The expertise I'd developed through my own experience became valuable to organizations wanting to avoid similar situations. I was interviewed frequently by business publications about corporate espionage, professional betrayal, and how to pursue accountability appropriately. The case had made me something of an expert on the topic, and I used that platform to encourage ethical business practices and appropriate responses to misconduct. 2 years after the betrayal was discovered, I received a letter from Sophia. She was in prison, serving her sentence, and had apparently spent time reflecting on her choices and their consequences. Natalie, the letter began, I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not writing to ask for it. I'm writing because my therapist suggested I needed to take full accountability for what I did, rather than continuing to blame circumstances or rationalize my behavior. The letter continued, What I did to you was inexcusable. I betrayed your trust systematically for 18 months, exploiting our friendship for money while pretending to support you. I treated confidential information you shared in good faith as product to sell, and I did it without remorse because I'd convinced myself it wasn't really harming you. I told myself that business was business, that everyone does whatever they can to get ahead, that you'd probably do the same thing if the situations were reversed. But none of that was true. I was stealing from my best friend and justifying it through rationalizations that let me avoid facing what I was actually doing. The consequences I'm facing, prison, destroyed reputation, ended career, are appropriate for what I did. I'm not asking you to advocate for reduced sentence or to help me rebuild afterward. I'm simply acknowledging that I was wrong, that I understand why you pursued charges, and that I deserve everything that's happened as a result of my choices. Sophia concluded, You were a genuine friend to me for 12 years. I repaid that friendship with betrayal and exploitation. I'm genuinely sorry for that, even though sorry doesn't begin to address the damage I caused. I hope you've been able to rebuild and move forward, and I hope someday I become someone who wouldn't make the choices I made. With remorse and regret, Sophia. I read the letter multiple times, looking for manipulation or hidden agenda, but finding what seemed like genuine contrition. I didn't respond immediately, needing time to process whether Sophia's apology meant anything to me at this point in my life. Eventually, I wrote back. My letter was brief but honest. Sophia, I appreciate you acknowledging what you did and taking responsibility for it. That's more accountability than I expected, and probably more than I would have received if the truth hadn't been discovered and documented so thoroughly. I'm not ready to forgive you, and I'm not sure I ever will be. The betrayal was profound and the damage was substantial, but I hope prison gives you the opportunity to examine why you made the choices you did and to become someone who wouldn't repeat them. I have moved forward. My business is thriving. I've rebuilt trust through appropriate security measures and transparent relationships, and I've used this experience to help others facing similar betrayals pursue accountability appropriately. I don't wish you ill, but I also don't wish you back in my life. What we had is permanently over, ended by your choices. I hope you find peace and purpose going forward, but that journey doesn't include me. I mailed the letter and closed that chapter completely. Sophia's apology had been meaningful in demonstrating that she'd finally understood what she'd done, but it didn't change the past or create any desire to rebuild our friendship. 3 years after the betrayal was discovered, I was featured in a documentary about corporate espionage and business ethics. The filmmakers wanted to profile several cases demonstrating how betrayal happens and how companies respond. And my story was chosen as an example of appropriate accountability. The documentary included interviews with me, with Marcus and Patricia explaining the legal strategy, with industry experts discussing the prevalence of corporate espionage, and with ethicists analyzing different approaches to addressing misconduct. It also included footage from Sophia's criminal trial, including her testimony where she'd admitted to the theft and expressed remorse. Watching that footage was strange, seeing someone I'd once considered my closest friend testifying about crimes committed against me while I sat in the gallery. Why did you choose to pursue criminal charges rather than just civil remedies? The documentary interviewer asked me. Because what Sophia did wasn't just a private betrayal or a civil business dispute, I replied. It was criminal conduct that hurt not just me, but the integrity of competitive business practices. If people can profit from corporate espionage without facing criminal consequences, there's no deterrent against that behavior. Do you think the consequences she faced were appropriate? The interviewer pressed. I considered the question carefully. Sophia received 2 years in prison, permanent professional sanctions, and complete destruction of her reputation. Those consequences are severe, but they're appropriate for someone who systematically stole confidential information and sold it for personal profit over 18 months while exploiting a friendship to facilitate that theft. So, you don't feel guilty about the severity of the consequences? No, I said firmly. I feel sad that someone I cared about made choices that led to those consequences. But I don't feel guilty about ensuring she faced accountability. She committed crimes. The legal system determined appropriate punishment. That's justice, not revenge. The documentary aired to strong reviews and significant viewership. It sparked discussions about business ethics, about appropriate responses to betrayal, and about the line between pursuing justice and seeking revenge. I participated in several panel discussions following the documentary's release, always emphasizing that truth and appropriate channels of accountability were more effective than personal vendettas or emotional confrontation. 4 years after the betrayal, my business had grown to include satellite offices in 3 cities and over 30 employees. We'd become known as the consulting firm that not only delivered excellent strategic advice, but also maintained the highest ethical standards and security protocols in the industry. The betrayal by Sophia had paradoxically strengthened my company's reputation rather than damaging it. Clients trusted us because they knew we took confidentiality seriously, that we'd proven we would protect their interests even at personal cost, and that we'd built systems preventing similar breaches in the future. I also established a scholarship fund for students studying business ethics, honoring the principle that ethical behavior wasn't just moral necessity, but practical strategy for long-term success. The fund provided financial support and mentorship to young professionals committed to maintaining integrity in competitive business environments. 5 years after discovering the initial evidence of betrayal, I received notification that Sophia had been released from prison after serving her sentence. I felt nothing particular about this news, no satisfaction in her punishment, no concern about her freedom, just a mild noting that another phase of the situation had concluded. Sophia tried to contact me once after her release, sending an email asking if we could meet to talk. I declined politely but firmly. Sophia, I appreciate that you've served your sentence and are rebuilding your life, but we have nothing to discuss. Our friendship ended with your betrayal, and accountability through legal consequences doesn't create reconciliation. I wish you well going forward, but that path doesn't include me. I never heard from her again. A former mutual friend mentioned years later that Sophia had left the state, found work in a completely different industry, and was apparently trying to build a life separate from her past. I hoped that was true, not because I cared about her specifically, but because I believed in the possibility of redemption and growth after consequences. 6 years after the betrayal, I was invited to write a book about business ethics and accountability. The publisher wanted me to detail my experience with corporate espionage, the strategies I'd employed to address it, and the lessons I'd learned about pursuing justice appropriately. I spent 6 months writing, reflecting deeply on the entire experience, from the initial shock of discovery, through the strategic response, the legal proceedings, and the long-term consequences for everyone involved. The book was titled, Trust and Accountability: Responding to Betrayal in Business. It became a business bestseller, widely used in MBA programs and corporate ethics training. The response was gratifying, with readers appreciating the balance between acknowledging the pain of betrayal and demonstrating strategic approaches to accountability. 7 years after my best friend betrayed me for money, I stood in my office looking out at the city, reflecting on the journey from that terrible Wednesday afternoon when Caroline had handed me that folder of evidence. The betrayal had been devastating. Discovering that someone I'd trusted completely had been systematically exploiting that trust for financial gain, that 12 years of friendship had meant so little that she'd treated me as nothing more than a source of profitable intelligence, that had hurt in ways I couldn't fully articulate. But the decision to let truth handle the accountability rather than seeking personal revenge had been absolutely right. By documenting the betrayal, building a comprehensive case, and pursuing justice through appropriate channels, I'd ensured that everyone involved faced real consequences while I maintained my own integrity and professional reputation. Sophia had faced criminal prosecution, professional destruction, and the permanent stain of being known for betraying her best friend for money. The competing firms had paid substantial damages and suffered reputational harm that took years to repair. The executives who'd knowingly purchased stolen information had lost their positions and credibility. And I had rebuilt my business stronger than before, established myself as a leader in business ethics, and used the experience to help others pursue accountability appropriately. My best friend had betrayed me for money. I'd let the truth handle it. And truth had been far more devastating than any revenge I could have personally designed. The betrayal had tried to destroy me. Instead, it had refined me, strengthened my business, and ultimately demonstrated that accountability through proper channels was more powerful than any act of personal vengeance could ever be.